The amber light of my desk lamp casts a warm glow over the scattered photographs before me. I've been sorting through my grandmother's belongings for weeks now, organizing what to keep and what to donate after her passing. At 87, she had accumulated quite the collection of memories. Just one more box, I mutter to myself, reaching for the worn leather case tucked away in the corner of her attic. The brass clasp is tarnished with age, requiring a bit of force to snap open. Inside lies a collection of photographs I've never seen before, older than anything else I've found. My fingers brush against the faded edges of a particularly large portrait, carefully extracting it from its resting place. It's a family portrait, formally posed as was customary in the early 1900s. The inscription on the back reads, "Sullivan Family, June 1905. My mother's maiden name." I examine the photograph more closely. A stern-looking man with a thick mustache stands rigidly behind a seated woman in a high-necked dress, her hair pulled into a severe bun. 3 children surround them, 2 boys in short pants and jackets standing on either side, and a baby, swaddled in an ornate blanket, resting in the woman's arms. At first glance, it's like countless other family portraits from that era. Stiff poses, solemn expressions. No one smiled for photographs back then. The exposure time was too long, and besides, having your photograph taken was a serious affair, not a moment for frivolity. I place the photograph on my scanner, intending to digitize it for the family archive I've been building. As the high-resolution image appears on my computer screen, I lean in closer. There's something about the baby's blanket that catches my eye. "That's odd," I whisper, zooming in on the image. The blanket appears to have an intricate pattern woven into its fabric. At normal resolution, it looks like a typical lace design of the period. But as I enlarge the image, my blood runs cold. What I initially took for a decorative pattern now reveals itself as tiny, meticulous handwriting, covering the entire blanket. The writing is so small that it would have been invisible to anyone viewing the original photograph without magnification. Modern technology has revealed what's remained hidden for over a century. I adjust my glasses and squint at the screen, trying to make out the words. They're in an elegant flowing script, but the language doesn't appear to be English. Some phrases I can partially decipher, but others are completely foreign to me. My curiosity piqued. I reach for my phone and dial the number of Professor Eleanor Williams, a colleague from the university's history department who specializes in early 20th century American history. "Eleanor? It's Michael. I've found something in my grandmother's possessions that I think might interest you." The following evening, Eleanor sits across from me at my dining room table, her silver-framed reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she studies the enlarged photograph on my laptop. "This is extraordinary, Michael," she says, looking up at me with widened eyes. "If this photograph is authentic, and by all appearances it is, what we're looking at is incredibly rare." "What do you mean?" I ask, sliding into the chair beside her. The writing on this blanket appears to be a form of cryptographic text. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was a fascination with spiritualism, secret societies, and occult practices, even among seemingly respectable families. The Spanish influenza hadn't yet hit, but tuberculosis and other diseases were rampant. People were desperate for protection, for answers. Eleanor points to a specific section of the blanket. "These symbols here, they're reminiscent of theosophical writings. The Theosophical Society was quite popular during this time period. They combined elements of various religions and philosophies, with a particular interest in the supernatural." I lean closer to the screen. "So you're saying my ancestors were involved in some kind of occult group?" "Not necessarily," Eleanor replies, adjusting her glasses. "But someone in this family certainly had knowledge of these practices. The question is why they would incorporate such writings into an infant's blanket, and then memorialize it in a family portrait. Could it have been meant as a protection for the baby?" I ask. "Possibly. Infant mortality was devastatingly high in those days. Many families lost multiple children before they reached adulthood. It wouldn't be unusual for parents to seek any means of protection they could find." She pauses, studying the image more carefully. "But this is unusually elaborate." I point to the baby in the photograph. "Do you know which relative this might be?" Eleanor shakes her head. "That's your family history to explore, Michael. But I can help you research the symbolism on this blanket. It might give us clues about what your ancestors were involved in." "There's more," I say, pulling out my phone. "I did some initial research on the Sullivan family from this time period. The man in the photograph is William Sullivan. He was a banker in Boston. The woman is his wife, Margaret. The two boys are Edward and James, aged 10 and 8, and the baby. I swallow hard. The baby is Catherine. According to the records I found, she died 3 months after this photograph was taken. Eleanor's expression softens. I'm sorry to hear that, though as I mentioned, infant mortality was... That's not all, I interrupt. William, Margaret, and both boys also died within the year. The entire family, gone in less than 12 months after this photograph was taken. Eleanor removes her glasses, her brow furrowing. All of them? That's unusual. Even for that time period, what were the causes of death? That's where things get strange. The official record lists different causes. Pneumonia for the baby, a fall for William, tuberculosis for Margaret, and a drowning accident for the boys. But I found a newspaper clipping that mentioned rumors of foul play, though nothing was ever proven. And no surviving family members? I shake my head. William had a younger brother named Thomas who inherited the house and all their possessions. He's my direct ancestor. The family story was always that great-great-grandfather Thomas made his fortune after his brother's tragic passing, but no one ever mentioned the suspicious circumstances. Eleanor is silent for a moment, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against the table. Michael, I think we need to take a closer look at this blanket inscription, and perhaps we should find out what happened to the original blanket itself. You think it's still around after all this time? Family heirlooms have a way of persisting, especially those associated with tragedy. People are reluctant to discard such items, even when they don't fully understand their significance. I close my laptop and stand up. There are more boxes in my grandmother's attic. If the blanket survived, that's where it would be. The attic is stifling despite the autumn chill outside. Dust motes dance in the beam of my flashlight as Eleanor and I carefully make our way between stacked trunks and boxes. Your grandmother was quite the collector, Eleanor remarks, running her finger along the spine of a leather-bound book resting atop a nearby trunk. She never threw anything away, I agree. Said it was disrespectful to the memory of those who came before. We make our way to the far corner of the attic where several ancient-looking trunks are stacked against the wall. Unlike the cardboard boxes containing my grandmother's more recent possessions, these trunks appear to date back generations. These look promising, Eleanor says, kneeling beside the lowest trunk. The wood is dark with age, the metal bindings corroded with time. A heavy padlock secures the latch. We'll need to find the key, I say, shining my flashlight around the attic. Eleanor examines the lock more closely. This is quite old. Late 19th century, I'd guess. The key might be long gone. I run my hands along the top of the trunk, feeling for any hidden compartments or attachments. My fingers brush against something metal secured to the underside of the lid. Wait, I think I found something. Crouching down, I locate a small metal box affixed to the trunk with what appears to be ancient adhesive. The box comes away in my hand with a dry cracking sound. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, is a tarnished key. That's convenient, Eleanor remarks with a raised eyebrow. Too convenient? I ask, suddenly uneasy. Let's just say your ancestors wanted to ensure that whoever found this trunk would be able to open it. Whether that's a good thing or not remains to be seen. With a deep breath, I insert the key into the padlock. It turns with surprising ease, as if the mechanism has been recently oiled. The lock springs open, and I remove it from the latch. Ready? I ask Eleanor, my hand resting on the lid of the trunk. She nods, her expression a mixture of academic curiosity and caution. Open it. The hinges creak in protest as I lift the heavy lid. The interior of the trunk is lined with faded red velvet, now discolored to a brownish hue in places. Stacked neatly inside are leather-bound journals, bundles of letters tied with ribbon, small boxes containing what appear to be personal effects, and several objects wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. This is a family archive, Eleanor whispers reverently. These journals could provide incredible insight into your family's history. I reach for one of the journal and open it carefully. The pages are filled with elegant handwriting, dated entries spanning from January to December of 1904. This appears to be Margaret Sullivan's diary, I say, skimming the first few entries. A year before the photograph was taken, Eleanor picks up another journal. And this one is from 1905, the year of the photograph and the year they died. We spend the next hour carefully examining the contents of the trunk, creating an inventory of the items within. The journals span decades, from the 1880s through 1905, documenting the daily lives of the Sullivan family. There are letters, receipts, legal documents, and various personal items, all meticulously preserved. "Michael, look at this," Eleanor says, carefully unwrapping one of the tissue paper bundles. Inside lies a folded piece of fabric, discolored with age but still intact. She gently spreads it out on the attic floor beside the trunk. My breath catches in my throat. It's the blanket from the photograph, the baby Catherine's blanket, covered in the same intricate writing we observed in the digitized image. "It's real," I whisper, reaching out to touch the delicate fabric. The writing feels slightly raised under my fingertips, as if it had been embroidered with incredible precision. "Don't touch it too much," Eleanor cautions. "The oils from our hands could damage it after all this time." She pulls a pair of cotton gloves from her pocket and slips them on before carefully lifting the blanket for closer examination. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary," she murmurs. "Each letter is perfectly formed, consistent throughout. This would have taken months of painstaking work." "But what does it say?" I ask. "I'll need better light and my reference materials to translate it properly," Eleanor replies. "But from what I can see, it appears to be a mixture of Latin, Greek, and some form of encoded text using alchemical symbols." As she turns the blanket over, something falls from within its folds. A small, leather-bound notebook, no larger than the palm of my hand. The cover is unmarked, the pages yellowed with age. Eleanor picks it up and carefully opens it. "It's a key," she says, her eyes widening as she flips through the pages. "A cipher key for translating the text on the blanket." "Why would they create such an elaborate code?" I ask. "People don't go to these lengths unless they're trying to hide something significant," Eleanor replies, her voice solemn. "Whatever message is encoded on this blanket, someone wanted to ensure it wouldn't be easily deciphered, but also that the right person would eventually be able to read it." She closes the small notebook and hands it to me. "We should take these items downstairs where we can examine them properly. And Michael," she adds, her expression grave, "I think we should also take Margaret's journals for 1904 and 1905. I have a feeling they might provide crucial context for understanding the blanket." As I reach back into the trunk to retrieve the journals, my hand brushes against something cold and metallic at the bottom. Pushing aside some papers, I reveal a tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. The front is engraved with intricate designs similar to some of the symbols on the blanket. "What's that?" Eleanor asks, leaning closer. I lift the locket by its chain. It looks like a piece of jewelry. I press the small clasp on the side, and the locket springs open to reveal a tiny photograph on one side, a portrait of baby Catherine, and a lock of dark hair on the other, secured behind a small glass panel. "A mourning locket," Eleanor explains. "It was common practice to keep a lock of hair from a deceased loved one, especially a child." I close the locket and place it in my pocket. "Let's take everything downstairs. I think we have a lot of reading to do." The dining room table is covered with our findings from the trunk. The blanket is carefully spread out on a clean white sheet to protect it. Margaret's journals from 1904 and 1905 sit beside it, along with the cipher notebook and several other items we thought might be relevant, including the locket and a bundle of letters addressed to William Sullivan from someone identified only as B. Eleanor has been meticulously photographing the blanket, section by section, to create a complete digital record of the writing. I've been skimming through Margaret's 1904 journal, looking for any mention of the blanket or unusual activities. "Listen to this entry from March 15th, 1904, I say, reading aloud from the journal. "William brought home a curious book today, lent to him by B. He would not let me examine it closely, saying some knowledge is not meant for women's minds. I caught a glimpse of strange diagrams and foreign text when he left it open on his desk. I fear his interest in these matters is growing too intense." Eleanor looks up from her photography. "B must be the person from those letters. Does she mention the book again?" I flip through more pages. "Yes, several times. Here on April 2nd, William was in his study all night again with that dreadful book. I heard him speaking in a language I do not recognize. When I brought him tea this morning, his eyes were bloodshot, and he barely acknowledged my presence. I am increasingly concerned about his new interests." "And what about the blanket? When does that first appear?" Eleanor asks. I continue scanning the entries. The first mention is on July 10th, 1904. I am with child again. William was overjoyed at the news, but his reaction was unusual. He immediately locked himself in his study and remained there until dawn. This morning, he presented me with designs for an elaborate christening blanket, insisting it must be completed before the baby arrives. The patterns are unlike anything I have seen before, not flowers or animals as is customary, but strange symbols and lettering. When I questioned him, he said only that it would ensure our child's protection and future prosperity. Eleanor sets down her camera. So William designed the blanket, not Margaret, and this was before Catherine was even born. I nod, continuing to read entries from the journal. The story that unfolds is increasingly disturbing. Throughout her pregnancy, Margaret writes of William's growing obsession with the mysterious book and his insistence on the creation of the special blanket. She describes hiring a skilled embroiderer to execute the complex design, noting that the woman often seemed uncomfortable with the work, but was generously compensated for her silence and skill. By December 1904, Margaret's entries betray a deep anxiety. She writes of strange sounds in the night, of William conducting what she calls rituals in his study, and of a growing tension in the household. The two older boys, Edward and James, are mentioned as becoming withdrawn and fearful of their father. The final entry from 1904, dated December 31st, reads, "The blanket is finally complete. Mrs. Fletcher delivered it today, her hands trembling as she handed it over. She refused to stay for tea or payment, saying only that she wants nothing more to do with that devil's work." William inspected it thoroughly and seemed satisfied, locking it away in his safe until the baby arrives. "I fear what I have allowed into my home. If not for the children, I would flee this house tonight. May God forgive us for whatever William has set in motion." I close the 1904 journal and reach for the one from 1905. Margaret was clearly terrified by whatever William was involved in. Eleanor has been making notes as I read. Based on the time period and the descriptions, it sounds like William may have become involved in ceremonial magic or some occult practice. The early 1900s saw a resurgence of interest in such things among the educated classes. But what was his purpose? I ask, opening the 1905 journal. What did he hope to achieve with this blanket? Let's see if the 1905 journal provides any answers, Eleanor suggests. And I've made enough progress with photographing the blanket that we can begin attempting to translate it using the cipher. The first entry in the 1905 journal is dated February 28th. Catherine Rose Sullivan was born tonight, after a difficult labor. She is small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and William's eyes. William insisted on being present for the birth, something most men would find distasteful. The moment she emerged, he wrapped her in that dreadful blanket, despite the midwife's protests that it should be washed first. He whispered something over her that I could not hear. The midwife crossed herself and left as soon as she was paid. I am too exhausted to argue. I pray that my fears about William's behavior are merely the fancies of an overworked mind. The entries that follow document Catherine's first months of life. Margaret notes that the baby is unnaturally quiet, rarely crying even when hungry or wet. She describes Catherine as an oddly alert infant, whose gaze seems to follow movements across a room with unnatural intensity. William, she writes, spends hours alone with the baby, often in his study with the door locked. Then comes the entry from June 10th, 1905. "The photographer came today to take our family portrait. William was insistent that Catherine be wrapped in her blanket for the photograph. When I suggested the christening gown would be more appropriate, his reaction was so severe that I feared he might strike me. The boys were terrified into silence. I acquiesced, of course. The photographer seemed uncomfortable with William's specific instructions about how the blanket should be arranged, but a generous tip silenced any objections. I cannot shake the feeling that this photograph serves some purpose beyond a simple family memento." "That's the photograph we found," I say, glancing at my laptop where the digitized image is still displayed. "Taken just a few months before they all died." Eleanor nods grimly. "And based on what we're reading, it seems the blanket was far more than a protective charm. William had some specific purpose in mind." I continue reading through the journal, and the entries become increasingly disturbing. Margaret describes changes in the household, unusual cold spots, objects moving on their own, strange sounds in the walls. She writes of the boys' nightmares and their refusal to be alone with either their father or the baby. William is portrayed as becoming more detached from reality, spending days at a time in his study, emerging only for meals, which he barely touches. On September 15th, 1905, Margaret writes, "Catherine fell ill today. A sudden fever that the doctor cannot explain. William refuses to remove the blanket, even to bathe her. He sits by her cradle day and night, reading from that book and making marks on the floor around her. The doctor threatened to call the authorities if William continues to interfere with Catherine's treatment, but as soon as the doctor left, William locked us all in the nursery and resumed his strange incantations. I fear for my baby's soul. The next entry, dated September 18th, 1905, is brief and blotched with what appear to be tear stains. Catherine passed at dawn. William showed no grief, only a cold fury. He wrapped her body in the blanket and locked himself in the study with her. When he emerged hours later, he was alone. He would not tell me where my baby is. I have searched the house but found nothing. When I demanded to know what he had done with our daughter's body, he only said, "She is where she needs to be." I have written to my sister in secret. As soon as I can arrange it, the boys and I will flee this house and this man I no longer recognize. I look up from the journal, my hands shaking slightly. Catherine died and William took her body, but according to the official records, she was buried in the family plot at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Eleanor's expression is grim, which suggests that whatever was buried there might not have been Catherine, or at least not all of her. What do you mean? She gestures to the locket with its lock of hair. In occult practices of that time, physical remains, especially from infants who were considered pure vessels, were sometimes used in rituals intended to bind or summon certain entities. The hair in this locket, the missing body. I'm starting to form a disturbing theory about what William Sullivan might have been attempting. I turn back to the journal, dreading what I might find in the remaining entries. There are only a few more. On October 5th, 1905, Margaret writes, "William is dead. They say he fell from the roof while inspecting a leak, but there was no reason for him to be there, especially in the dead of night. The servants heard him screaming before he fell, not in fear, they say, but as if in argument with someone unseen. His body was terribly broken on the stones below. I should feel grief or relief, but I feel only numbness and fear. Something is still not right in this house. I catch glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. The boys refuse to sleep alone. Last night, Edward swore he saw Catherine standing at the foot of his bed, still wrapped in that accursed blanket. The penultimate entry is dated October 20th, 1905. James drowned today in the pond at the edge of our property. The pond is shallow, barely up to his knees, yet somehow my boy was found face down in the water. Edward, who was with him, is nearly catatonic with shock. When the doctor managed to coax him to speak, Edward would only say, "Catherine called him into the water." The doctor attributes this to the trauma of witnessing his brother's death, but I know better. I have seen her too, moving through the halls at night. William has done something unforgivable and we are all paying the price. I have sent Edward to stay with my sister. Tomorrow, I will consult with Father Donnelly about exorcising this house. The final entry in the journal, written in a shaky, almost illegible hand, is dated November 2nd, 1905. Edward is gone too. My sister found him in his bed this morning, cold and still, with no sign of illness or injury. Just a peaceful expression, as if he had simply decided to stop breathing in the night. My beautiful boy. There is no doubt in my mind now. William's work with the blanket, the rituals, the strange book. He was attempting something beyond mortal understanding, and he used our children as sacrifices. I cough blood into my handkerchief now. Whatever force he unleashed is coming for me too. I have hidden this journal and the blanket in the old trunk along with the cipher. If anyone finds these items, I beg you to destroy the blanket. Do not attempt to decipher the text. Burn it all and pray for our souls. William thought he was ensuring our family's legacy, but he has doomed us instead. I hear Catherine's footsteps outside my door now. She is coming for me, as she came for her brothers. May God have mercy on. The entry ends abruptly. According to the official records, Margaret Sullivan died of tuberculosis on November 3rd, 1905, just one day after this final journal entry. I close the journal slowly, feeling a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature in the room. The entire family was dead within 6 weeks of Catherine's passing, and Margaret believed it was because of whatever ritual William performed using the blanket. Eleanor is staring at the blanket spread out on the table, her expression troubled. Based on what we've read and what I can decipher from the blanket so far, I believe William Sullivan was attempting a form of binding ritual, something designed to tie his family's bloodline to an entity that would ensure their prosperity and influence for generations to come. But it backfired, I say. Instead of protecting them, it killed them all. Perhaps, Eleanor says, studying her notes. Or perhaps it worked exactly as intended, just not in the way William expected. What do you mean? You said William had a younger brother named Thomas who inherited everything after the family died. And Thomas is your direct ancestor, correct? I nod slowly, beginning to understand her implication. Yes. According to family history, Thomas had been struggling financially before inheriting his brother's estate. Afterward, he became incredibly successful, founded multiple businesses, made several prescient investments, and ultimately established the family fortune that sustained the Sullivans for generations. And did Thomas have children? Just one, a daughter named Catherine, born in 1906. Eleanor raises an eyebrow. Named after his deceased niece? That's interesting. It was supposedly in memory of the family tragedy, I explain. But you're suggesting something else, aren't you? I'm suggesting that whatever William Sullivan bound to his family's bloodline through that blanket and his infant daughter's sacrifice didn't disappear when the immediate family died. It simply transferred to the next closest blood relative, Thomas, and has been influencing your family's fortunes ever since. I shake my head in disbelief. That's impossible. You're talking about some kind of generational curse or supernatural entity that's been attached to my family for over a century. Am I? Eleanor asks quietly. Consider the pattern, Michael. Your family has prospered enormously since 1905, but has that prosperity come without cost? Have there been unusual deaths, strange accidents, particularly among children? I start to dismiss her suggestion, but memories begin to surface. Family stories I had always considered tragic coincidences. Great-Aunt Lillian's 3 sons, all dying before the age of 10 in separate accidents. My grandfather's sister, who drowned in the bathtub as a teenager. My own cousin, who fell from a tree at age 7 and never woke from his coma. There have been incidents, I admit reluctantly, but every family has tragedy, at the rate your family seems to experience it, and always balanced by extraordinary success and wealth. Eleanor shakes her head. It's as if something is taking payment, generation after generation. My eyes drift to the blanket spread before us, its intricate writing suddenly seeming malevolent rather than merely curious. If what you're suggesting is true, what can we do about it? How do we break such a connection? Eleanor sighs heavily. I'm not an expert in the occult, Michael. I'm a historian. But based on my studies, breaking such a bond would require understanding exactly what William did in the first place, deciphering the blanket completely, finding the book he was working from, and potentially performing some kind of counter-ritual. Or we could follow Margaret's last advice, I suggest. Burn it all and pray for their souls. That might work, Eleanor concedes. Or it might release whatever is bound to your family, potentially making things worse. Without understanding the nature of the binding, it's impossible to know what effect destruction might have. I run my hands through my hair in frustration. So we need to translate the blanket. Yes. With the cipher key, it should be possible, though time-consuming. And we should try to locate this mysterious book that William was using, as well as identify who B was, the person who introduced him to these practices. I pick up the bundle of letters addressed to William from B and begin to untie the ribbon binding them together. Let's start here. These might give us some insight into who William was working with and what they were trying to achieve. The letters span from early 1904 to September 1905, just before Catherine's death. They are written in an educated hand on expensive stationery, with a wax seal bearing an unusual symbol, a triangle containing what appears to be an eye, surrounded by rays or flames. The earliest letter, dated January 15, 1904, reads, My dear William, I was most intrigued by our conversation at the club last week regarding your interest in securing your family's future beyond the usual financial instruments. As promised, I have enclosed a copy of the text we discussed. It is on loan only. Such knowledge is not given, only shared temporarily with those deemed worthy. The path you are considering is not one to be undertaken lightly. The entities with which we may forge agreements are ancient and powerful, their concept of bargains different from our mortal understanding. Should you wish to proceed after studying the enclosed, please burn a white candle at midnight on the new moon and speak the words on page 73. I will know you have decided to continue your education. With highest regards, B. The subsequent letters document an evolving relationship between William and the mysterious B, who gradually introduces William to increasingly complex occult concepts and practices. B never fully identifies himself, but makes references to an organization called the Luminous Order, and their belief in forging pacts with entities they refer to as the benefactors. The most disturbing letter is dated August 20th, 1905, approximately a month before Catherine's death. William, your progress continues to impress. The blanket design you shared is technically perfect, each sigil and binding phrase positioned for maximum efficacy. However, I must caution you once more about the magnitude of what you propose. The binding of blood and future that you intend is the most powerful working our order has documented. The three who attempted it in the previous century all achieved extraordinary results for their bloodlines, but at terrible personal cost. None lived more than a year beyond the completion of the ritual. The benefactor you have chosen to bind to your line is among the most ancient and demanding. It will require sacrifice beyond what you may be prepared to give. Remember that in these workings, nothing is taken that is not freely offered, and nothing is gained without equivalent loss. If you truly wish to proceed, the optimal time approaches with the autumn equinox. The child must be wrapped in the completed blanket for no less than 40 days before the binding, and the ritual must be completed before the first frost. I will visit in person next week to inspect your preparations and provide final guidance. In eternal light, B. The final letter is dated September 25th, 1905, a week after Catherine's death. William, what you have done is beyond reckless. The ritual was to prepare the vessel, not consume it entirely. By taking matters into your own hands without proper guidance, you have created a tier rather than a door. The entity you have bound is indeed connected to your bloodline now, but without the proper containment that the living child would have provided. It will seek balance in its own way, taking what it believes it is owed while still fulfilling the letter of the bargain. I wash my hands of this matter and have informed the order of my complete disassociation from you and your working. The consequences are yours alone to bear. For the sake of whatever remains of our friendship, I offer one final piece of advice. Your immediate bloodline is now marked. Only those at a remove might survive to benefit from your terrible bargain. May whatever God you still believe in have mercy on your soul. B. I set down the final letter, my hands trembling slightly. He killed Catherine deliberately as part of the ritual, but apparently did it wrong. And this B person warned him that the entity would still be bound to the family bloodline, but would extract its own price. Eleanor has been taking notes as I read the letters aloud, and the last line is particularly telling. Only those at a remove might survive to benefit. That would be Thomas, the brother who wasn't part of the immediate family but still shared the bloodline. So Thomas inherited not just the wealth, but also this connection to whatever entity William had bound to the family. I say, struggling to accept the implications of what we've discovered. It appears so, Eleanor confirms, and based on your family history, it's been with your line ever since, taking its payment in each generation while also ensuring prosperity. I stand up abruptly, pacing the length of the dining room. This is insane. We're talking about supernatural pacts and sacrificial rituals like they're real things that actually happened, not just the delusions of a disturbed man who murdered his family. Eleanor regards me steadily. History is full of people who believed firmly in forces beyond our understanding. Whether these forces exist objectively or merely in the minds of believers, their effects on human actions and events are real enough. William Sullivan believed he was conducting a powerful ritual, and subsequently, his entire family died under unusual circumstances. Thomas Sullivan inherited a fortune and began an era of prosperity for your family lineage, punctuated by tragic deaths. These are the facts, regardless of how we interpret the causality. I sink back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. So what do we do now? How do we proceed? We have several options, Eleanor says pragmatically. We can attempt to fully translate the blanket using the cipher, which might give us a clearer understanding of exactly what William was trying to do. We can try to locate this book that B provided, though that may be difficult after more than a century. We can research the luminous order and see if it still exists in some form. Or what? Or we can follow Margaret's advice. Destroy the blanket and all related items and hope that severs the connection. I look at the items spread across my dining room table. The physical links to a dark family secret that has apparently influenced generations of Sullivans. If we destroy everything, will we ever know the full truth? Probably not, Eleanor admits. But sometimes, Michael, knowledge comes at too high a price. You need to decide what's more important to you, understanding exactly what happened, or potentially protecting future generations of your family. I finger the locket in my pocket, thinking of the lock of Catherine's hair preserved inside. A physical remnant of a baby used as a sacrifice by her own father. Let me sleep on it. This is a lot to process. Eleanor nods understandingly. Of course. I'll continue working on translating sections of the blanket in the meantime. Perhaps with more information, the choice will become clearer. I don't sleep that night. How could I, with the revelations of the day spinning through my mind? Instead, I find myself drawn back to the dining room in the early hours of the morning, staring at the blanket spread out under the soft glow of the lamp. The intricate writing seems to shift and move in the dim light, though I know it's just a trick of my tired eyes. I think about baby Catherine, wrapped in this blanket, unknowingly part of her father's dark ambitions. I think about Margaret, watching her husband descend into obsession, too afraid or too conditioned to defy him until it was too late. I think about the boys, Edward and James, innocent victims of whatever force their father had invited into their home. And I think about Thomas, my direct ancestor, who benefited from all this death. Did he know what his brother had done? Was he complicit in some way? Or was he just the unwitting recipient of both a fortune and a curse? I'm so lost in thought that I don't immediately register the sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere upstairs. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, like small footsteps moving across the floor above. I freeze, listening intently. My house is old, prone to the usual creaks and groans of settling wood, but this is different, more deliberate, more purposeful. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, moving across the ceiling now, directly overhead. Hello? I call out, immediately feeling foolish. I live alone. There shouldn't be anyone else in the house. The tapping stops. The silence that follows is somehow worse. I shake my head, attributing the sound to my overtired mind and the power of suggestion after a day spent reading about family ghosts and supernatural pacts. I turn back to the blanket, reaching out to touch one of the symbols embroidered near the edge. As my finger makes contact with the fabric, the lights flicker once, twice, and then stabilize. A cold draft sweeps through the room, ruffling the pages of the open journals. Enough, I mutter to myself, withdrawing my hand. You're scaring yourself over nothing. But as I step back from the table, something catches my eye. A faint impression in the blanket where my finger had touched it, as if the fabric is responding to my touch. The impression deepens as I watch, forming a small indentation that slowly spreads, the threads moving and realigning themselves. Heart pounding, I grab my phone from my pocket and snap several photos of the phenomenon, then retreat to the other side of the room. The movement in the fabric continues for several more seconds before stopping. The blanket now shows a small altered area, where one symbol has transformed into another. My phone rings, startling me so badly that I nearly drop it. Eleanor's name flashes on the screen. Hello? I answer, my voice unsteady. Michael, I've been working on the translation all night, Eleanor says without preamble, her voice tense. I think we need to destroy the blanket immediately. The text isn't just a binding ritual, it's an invitation, a doorway of sorts. And based on what I've translated so far, interaction with the blanket by someone of the bloodline could reactivate. Eleanor, I interrupt, still staring at the altered symbol on the blanket. Something just happened. I touched the blanket and part of it. It changed. There's a long pause before she responds. Don't touch it again. Don't even go near it. I'm coming over right now. What's happening, Eleanor? I ask, a chill running down my spine. William Sullivan didn't just bind an entity to your family line, she says, her voice grave. He created a conduit, a way for it to move between its realm and ours. The blanket isn't just a record of the binding. It's the door, and I think you just knocked on it. Eleanor arrives 20 minutes later, breathless and carrying a large leather bag. She barely greets me before hurrying to the dining room to examine the blanket. Don't get too close, I warn her. I haven't touched it again, but it hasn't changed back either. She sets her bag on a chair and pulls out several items. A digital camera with a telephoto lens, a small notebook filled with her translations, and, surprisingly, a container of salt and a bundle of dried herbs. Precautions, she explains, noticing my questioning look at the latter items. I'm a historian, not a mystic, but I'm also not foolish enough to ignore centuries of protective traditions when dealing with potentially dangerous artifacts. She carefully arranges a circle of salt around her chair before sitting down to examine the blanket from a distance, using the camera to zoom in on the altered symbol. This is fascinating, she murmurs, comparing the new configuration to her notes. The symbol has changed from what appears to be a binding or containment sigil to something more invitational. It's as if your touch triggered a recognition sequence in the fabric itself. That's not possible, I argue. It's just an old blanket with embroidery. Eleanor looks up at me, her expression serious. Michael, After everything we've read in those journals and letters, are you really going to insist on conventional explanations? The blanket was created as part of an occult ritual involving sacrifice and binding supernatural entities. We have to at least consider the possibility that it's more than just fabric and thread. She's right, of course. As much as part of me wants to dismiss all of this as the deranged fantasies of my disturbed ancestor, the evidence before us suggests something genuinely unusual is occurring. So what do we do now? I ask. We need to neutralize the blanket before anything else happens, Eleanor says decisively. Based on Margaret's journal and my partial translations, burning it might indeed be the safest option. What about understanding the full truth of what happened? What about breaking the connection to my family line? Eleanor sighs. I've translated enough to understand the basics of what William did. He sacrificed his daughter to create a permanent link between his bloodline and an entity he believed would bestow prosperity and influence. The entity has been extracting its payment through the deaths of family members ever since. If we destroy the blanket, the physical conduit of that connection, we might be able to sever or at least weaken the link. Might? I press. You're not certain? How could I be? Eleanor responds, a hint of frustration in her voice. We're dealing with something that exists at the intersection of historical occultism, family tragedy, and potentially genuine supernatural phenomena. There are no certainties here, only informed attempts to address the situation. As if in response to her words, the lights flicker again, more pronounced this time. The temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. We need to decide quickly, Eleanor says, her breath now visible in the chilled air. I think whatever presence is attached to your family is aware of our discovery and our intentions. I'm about to respond when a new sound reaches us, the soft, unmistakable laughter of a child emanating from somewhere upstairs. Eleanor's eyes widen as she hears it too. Is there a child in your house? She whispers. I shake my head slowly. I live alone. The laughter comes again, followed by the light tapping of small feet on the floor above. Catherine, I breathe, the name escaping my lips before I can stop it. As if in confirmation, the tapping moves to the top of the stairs. Something is descending toward us, step by light step. Eleanor moves quickly, pulling items from her bag, more salt, candles, and a small silver flask. We need to act now. Help me gather everything. The blanket, the journals, the cipher, the locket, all of it. We'll take it outside and burn it in the garden. I hesitate, still torn between the desire to understand and the growing certainty that we're in danger. What about the presence upstairs? We focus on the task at hand, Eleanor says firmly. Whatever is coming down those stairs is a manifestation, a symptom. The blanket is the source. The footsteps have reached the bottom of the stairs now. We can hear them moving through the hallway toward the dining room. With a surge of determination, I begin gathering the items from the table, carefully folding the blanket without touching the symbols directly. Eleanor collects the journals and cipher, placing them in her bag. The back door is through the kitchen, I say, nodding toward the connecting doorway. We can go out that way and use the fire pit in the garden. Eleanor nods, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Go, I'll be right behind you. I move quickly through the kitchen, the bundled blanket clutched to my chest. As I reach for the back door handle, I hear Eleanor gasp behind me. Turning, I see her staring in horror at something in the dining room doorway. From my position, I can't see what she's looking at, but the expression on her face tells me everything I need to know. The temperature drops further, frost beginning to form on the kitchen windows, despite the autumn night being relatively mild. Eleanor, I call urgently. Come on! She backs away from whatever she's seeing, nearly stumbling in her haste to reach me. Open the door, Michael. Now. I fumble with the lock, my fingers clumsy with fear and cold. The door finally swings open, and we burst out into the night air, which feels bizarrely warm compared to the frigid interior of the house. We race across the lawn to the small stone fire pit at the far end of the garden. I've already laid firewood there earlier in the week, planning a quiet evening that now seems laughably normal compared to our current situation. Eleanor pulls a lighter from her pocket and ignites the kindling beneath the wood. As the flames begin to catch, she turns to me, her face pale in the growing firelight. I saw her, she whispers, standing in the doorway, a little girl in an old-fashioned dress, her face. She breaks off, shuddering. It wasn't right, Michael. It wasn't human. Not anymore. Whatever is using Catherine's form, it's not your ancestor's child. It's something else entirely. The fire is growing stronger now, the flames reaching higher as the larger pieces of wood begin to burn. I step forward, the blanket heavy in my arms. "Wait," Eleanor says, placing a hand on my arm. "We should do this properly. If we're going to destroy a potentially powerful occult object, we should take precautions." She quickly arranges a circle of salt around the fire pit, then sprinkles some of the dried herbs onto the flames, which briefly turn a greenish-blue color before returning to their normal orange glow. "Now," she says, stepping back, "throw it all in. Everything connected to the ritual." I hesitate for one final moment, the weight of a century-old family secret in my hands. Then, with a decisive motion, I cast the blanket onto the flames. Eleanor adds the journals, the cipher notebook, and the letters from B. The fire flares dramatically as the items catch, the flames reaching unusually high. The blanket, which should have burned quickly given its age and fabric composition, seems to resist the fire initially. The intricate writing glows a bright, unnatural blue against the orange flames, creating an eerie contrast. The locket, Eleanor reminds me. It contains Catherine's hair, a physical connection to the sacrifice. I reach into my pocket and pull out the silver locket, feeling its weight one last time before tossing it onto the burning pile. The moment it touches the flames, several things happen simultaneously. A high, piercing wail cuts through the night air. Not quite human, not quite animal. A sound of rage and loss and hunger. The house behind us shudders, windows rattling in their frames. And the fire suddenly roars upward, a column of flame stretching impossibly high into the night sky, changing color from orange to blue to a sickly green. Eleanor and I stumble backward, shielding our faces from the intense heat. The wailing continues, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ground beneath our feet trembles slightly, as if in response to the unearthly cry. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stops. The fire dies down to a normal level, once again the ordinary orange of burning wood. The air, which had felt charged with an indefinable energy, returns to the still calm of a typical autumn night. We stand in silence for several minutes, watching as the fire consumes the last of the blanket and its accompanying items, reducing William Sullivan's dark legacy to ash and memory. "Is it over?" I finally ask, my voice sounding strange to my own ears after the otherworldly shriek we just experienced. Eleanor watches the fire thoughtfully. "I believe so. Whatever connection existed through that blanket has been severed. Whether that fully breaks the bond between your family line and the entity William summoned, I can't say with certainty, but we've at least destroyed the primary conduit. And Catherine? The presence in the house? Gone, I think. Or at least, no longer able to manifest as it did." She turns to look at the house, which sits dark and quiet behind us. We should check, though, carefully. We approach the house with caution, but the oppressive cold that had filled it earlier is gone. The rooms are now merely cool in the ordinary way of an autumn night. There is no sign of any supernatural presence. No footsteps, no child's laughter, no movement in the shadows. In the dining room, the only evidence of our research is the empty space where the blanket and journals had been laid out. Even the faint smell of old fabric and paper that had lingered in the air is gone, replaced by the slightly smoky scent we've brought in with us from the garden. "It feels different," I observe. "Lighter somehow." Eleanor nods in agreement. "The atmosphere has definitely changed. I think we did what needed to be done." We spend the next hour carefully checking the rest of the house, but find nothing unusual or concerning. By the time we return to the dining room, dawn is breaking, pale light filtering through the windows. "What happens now?" I ask, suddenly aware of how exhausted I am after our ordeal. "You live your life," Eleanor says simply, "free from whatever influence that thing might have had on your family. And perhaps you keep an eye out for any lingering effects, unusual good fortune balanced by tragic accidents. If the pattern truly breaks, that would be further confirmation that we succeeded. And the historical aspect? Don't you want to research the luminous order or try to identify who B was?" Eleanor smiles tiredly. "Of course I do. I'm still a historian, but I'll conduct that research at a safe distance from any remaining artifacts. Some knowledge is worth pursuing, but not at any cost." I walk her to the door as the sun rises fully, casting long shadows across the front lawn. Before leaving, she turns to me one last time. "You made the right choice, Michael. Understanding the past is important, but not when it threatens your future. Whatever William Sullivan set in motion died in those flames tonight. Your family can move forward now, unburdened by his terrible bargain." As I watch her drive away, I'm not entirely convinced she's right about the entity's influence being completely gone. The prosperity that has followed my family for generations might diminish, or the pattern of tragic deaths might continue. Only time will tell. But standing in my doorway, watching the morning light chase away the last shadows of night, I feel something I haven't experienced since finding that photograph. Hope. Whatever darkness William Sullivan invited into our bloodline, we've at least confronted it, acknowledged it, and attempted to banish it. And sometimes, that act of confrontation is itself a form of exorcism. I close the door and head upstairs to finally get some rest. As I pass the spare bedroom that I've been using to sort through my grandmother's possessions, I notice something on the dresser that wasn't there before. A small, aged photograph in a simple frame. Approaching cautiously, I pick it up to examine it more closely. It's a portrait of a baby, perhaps 6 months old, dressed in an elaborate christening gown. The sepia-toned image is remarkably well preserved, the details crisp despite its obvious age. There's no identification on the front, but when I turn the frame over, I find a handwritten note on the back. Catherine Rose Sullivan, February 28, 1905. May she rest in peace and find the innocence in death that was stolen from her in life. The handwriting is unfamiliar, not Margaret's from the journals nor William's from the letters we examined. Perhaps Thomas, my great-great-grandfather, the brother who inherited everything and began our family's rise to prosperity. I study the baby's face in the photograph. She looks peaceful, normal, just an infant from a bygone era, captured in a moment of time. There's nothing sinister or unnatural about her appearance. Just a child who never had the chance to grow up, used as a pawn in her father's dark ambitions. "I'm sorry," I whisper to the image, "for what was done to you, for what your father made you part of. I hope you've found peace." I place the photograph back on the dresser, uncertain whether its appearance is a final manifestation of the presence we banished, or simply an overlooked item from my grandmother's collection. Either way, I decide to keep it, not as a connection to William's ritual, but as a reminder of an innocent victim who deserves to be remembered. As I turn to leave the room, I notice something else. A faint, sweet scent in the air, like baby powder mixed with lavender. It lingers for just a moment before dissipating, leaving me to wonder if it was real or just a product of my exhausted imagination. Some questions, I realize, are better left unanswered. The line between the explicable and inexplicable, between history and the supernatural, is thinner than most people believe. I've glimpsed what lies on the other side of that line, and while the historian in me craves understanding, the human in me recognizes the wisdom in certain boundaries. I close the door to the spare room and make my way to bed, leaving the mysteries of the Sullivan family, both those we've solved and those that remain, for another day. The 1905 family photograph that started this journey is now ash in my garden, its secrets consumed by cleansing fire. But as I drift towards sleep, one thought circles in my mind. In every family portrait, there are stories visible to the naked eye, and others that only emerge when you look more closely, when you examine the details that most overlook. Sometimes those hidden stories are better left undiscovered, and sometimes bringing them into the light is the only way to truly put them to rest. As my consciousness fades, I think I hear the distant sound of a child's laughter, not menacing now, but light and free, fading into silence as sleep finally claims me. The end.